All right. Today's reading comes from Hebrews chapter 11, verses 32 to 40. Please feel free to read along with me. And what more shall I say? For time will fail me if I tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, of David, and Samuel and the prophets, who by faith conquered kingdoms, performed acts of righteousness, obtained promises, shut the mouths of lions, quenched the power of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, from weakness were made strong, became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight. Women received back their dead by resurrection, and others were tortured, not accepting their release, so that they might obtain a better resurrection. And others experienced mockings and scourgings, yes, also chains and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn to, they were tempted, they were put to death with the sword. They went about in sheepskins, in goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, ill-treated, men of whom the world was not worthy, wandering in deserts and mountains and caves and holes in the ground. And all these, having gained approval through their faith, did not receive what was promised, because God had provided something better for us, so that apart from us they were not made be perfect. This is the word of the Lord.
You may be seated. If you've been with us for the last little bit, you know that we've been going through the book of Hebrews, and the author of Hebrews has been trying to basically do one thing this entire time, which is to provide his group of readers, which are Jewish converts, right? Jews who became Christians, some evidence, some help, as much as they could have, so that they wouldn't eventually walk away from their faith, because they're going through a lot. They're going through persecution, difficulty, and all those things. And so he's done quite a bit. He's given them compelling arguments. He's given them evidence to prove those compelling arguments. He even tried the warning technique where he goes, hey, if you fall away, these unfortunate things are going to happen to you, and they're pretty harsh. So he's tried kind of everything in the book to really help his church, his group of people, to say, hey, you know what? No matter what happens in life, no matter the difficulties, stay true to the process, right? Stay faithful and don't ever turn away. Well, in chapter 11, he then gets to what I'm calling his ace up his sleeve. A tactic that I think he knows and we all know works really well, maybe better than any of the tactics he's tried so far. And that tactic is the way of the inspirational role model. And this is undoubtedly, in my opinion, a great move, right? Because if there's one thing about life and history and culture that we know throughout every history, every time, age, and culture, is that every part of the world and every people love themselves their heroes, right? It's why there's so many documentaries, biographies, not alone to mention, at least today, all of our superhero fictional movies. We love heroes. And we love them because they show us the things that are possible. They show us things like, hey, if he or she can do it, then so can I. This very idea of role model, inspirational, is what got me to believe when I was young, that though I was a chubby, pretty short Korean kid, that if I tried hard enough, could be like Mike. And so I tried to be like Mike. And though I soon realized that no matter what I did, I could not be like Mike, as you can probably tell why, it did not stop me from buying some odd 35 pair of Jordans, because you know, as he said, it's got to be the shoes. And if you got the shoes, maybe it'll work. But the point is, throughout history and life and culture, one of the tried and true tactics to help someone try to maximize who they are and become maybe someone that they don't think they can be is to inspire them via the heroes of the trade, which in this case for the author of Hebrews is the heroes of the faith in the famed Hall of Faith chapter of Hebrews 11. And if you read the chapter, man, what a list. Let me just give you a couple names that you should probably know. Abraham, Noah, Moses, pretty good. And then as you go, there are other names. But then in verse 32, the author then finally realizes something. He goes, wait, I can't just keep naming all these heroes because I'm never going to finish this letter if I keep on going, because there's seemingly an unending list of them. So what he does is then he names a few more without detail, and then he summarizes their heroic exploits, and then he goes on, and man, what a job he does. And the way he describes it is actually pretty epic. It's just that when you read scripture, you probably read it with sleepy eyes or whatever, so you don't really hear what's going on. But let me read this for you. If you add some epic, heroic music to this text, I'm telling you, it's y'all are Right? Okay, when I read this, we're going to play this music, and I'm telling you, just hear it. It'll get you amped. You'll feel like you can do these things that the author's describing, okay? Ready? We're going to play the music, and then we're going to read it for you. Ready? Now play it. And what more shall I say? For time will fail me if I tell thee, Rock, Samson, Jephthah, David, and Samuel the prophets, who by faith conquered kingdoms, from acts of righteousness, obtained promises, shut the mouths of lions, quenched the power of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, from weakness were made strong, became mighty in war, with forearms of flesh, penetrated the sea, and you can even hear it. This is the passage. And it begins with the word the others. And the change is drastic, right? So drastic that you kind of have to read it thinking of what you just heard versus what you're going to hear now. Here's what he says then afterwards. He says, and others were tortured, not accepting their release, so that they might obtain a better resurrection. And others experienced mockings and scourgings, yes, also chains and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn in two, they were tempted, they were put to death with the sword. They went about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, ill-treated, men of whom the world was not worthy, wandering in deserts and mountains and caves and holes in the ground. You're like, wait, what? Wait, what? Like, wait, what's going on? You're a little befuddled because all of a sudden things took a drastic turn. From heroic exploits one hand to shattering defeats and failure. Tortured and choosing not to escape even though they could have. Mockings and chainings and stonings, being put to death by the sword. Wandering in deserts and caves and holes in the ground. It's such a dramatic shift that it almost makes you wonder as a reader, wait, what happened? Did the author make a mistake? Is he kind of losing his mind? Is he having a mental breakdown? Like, what's going on? Because if the goal, and it is indeed the goal, if the stated goal is to motivate your people to do better, to overcome and do all these things, this is not the way you do it. Sure, go ahead and start with the failures. Go ahead and start with the things that didn't work. But then end with the epic list, with the music and the whole bit. That's how you're supposed to do it. But that's not what he does. So why? Right? What's going on? Well, here's what's going on. The author is saying, while all those heroes and their heroic exploits are great, truth of the matter is, in this life, if you're going to survive, you need something better. That's not going to cut it. You need something that's going to allow you to face anything and everything in life and never waver, never drown, never die, never suffer, and indeed continue with your faith. In the face of all that life might and will throw at you, you're going to need something better to be able to face it all. And he says, what's that better? He says it's a better resurrection. Now, let me explain a little bit because that may not sound all that great to you. If you know my wife, Christina, and I, one thing you'll know about our relationship is that we love movies. We love movies. It's one of our favorite things to do together ever. And while I know now, 15 years in, exactly the type of movie that my wife, Christina, loves and does not love, early on in the marriage, I had lots of hope that she would love the movies that question every time. Does it have a happy ending? Does it have a happy ending? No. Well, no. Does it have a happy ending? No. To her, a sad ending was off limits. To her, anything with a cliffhanger, off limits. Everything has to resolve and everything has to have an ending. Now, because she loves me dearly, we tried watching some of these. And she tried her best. But it didn't work because 15 minutes in, she would fall asleep. And then I realized I'm watching it by myself, so I might as well not ask her to watch it. We'll just watch whatever she likes. And so now I know the rules. I know the movies we watch together have to go like this. They have to have lots of action. Fighting is highly encouraged. If there are assassins, even better. And then there has to be a happy ending. Sad and cliffhangers need not apply. I tell you this because the first half of this list is my wife's type of movie. It's where the characters triumph, where they overcome death, they miraculously escape, they victoriously conquer, where the impossible becomes possible because of whatever is happening in the movie. And let's be honest, we all love this kind of story, don't we? We all love the stories in the first half of chapter 11 up to verse 35, don't we? And if you think about the stories that the author suggests, even in 32 to 35, we all love them. Like, for instance, who doesn't love Daniel in the lion's den? A guy who stood up to faith and wrongly, unjustly thrown to a lion's den. And what happens? He's chilling because the lions' mouths get shut. And then whoever tried to ruin him, indeed, they're the ones who get ruined in the long run. We love stories like that. Or the one that comes right after, the story of Daniel's friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. 3 young men who were threatened to be thrown to a fiery furnace if they didn't bow down to a golden statue. And they say, no, we're not going to. So they're thrown in, they're protected somehow, and then, of course, the people who try to ruin them, they're the ones who get killed and die in the end. We love stories like that. Or the climax of this list, the women whose sons died and were brought back to life. By the way, he's referring to, the author that is, the wife of Zarephath, whose son comes back to life to the prophet Elijah in 1 Kings 17, and then also a Shunammite woman's son who comes back to life through Elisha in 2 Kings chapter 4. We love stories of people who die and come back, don't we? Because that's epic. It's good. It makes us feel good. That's what we want. And if we're being honest, many Christians, if not most, I think, if we're being honest, these are the stories that we want our faiths to look like. Or better, this is what we define great faith to look like, up against all the odds, with much prayer and great faith. That which seemed impossible miraculously becomes our reality. Don't answer the question by raising your hands, but in your mind, isn't this what we think great faith looks like? But the author is saying, do you know what happens if this is indeed your understanding of faith? Do you know what happens if this is your conceptual and hopeful dream of faith? The author says, here's what's going to happen. He goes, you're cooked. And if you're old and don't know what that means, it means you're doomed. Why? Because while there are certainly stories, and will continually be stories, where indeed the triumph happens, the victory happens, the impossible is made possible, there are countless more stories that do not have a happy ending. Stories that will not be made into movies or immortalized into great stories. Stories that will end up like the second half of this list, because that's simply how life goes a lot of the time. Isn't it? Well, this is exactly why the author switches things up. Because he's saying this is what we really need. We need the others who were scourged and mocked, chained and imprisoned. We need the others who, although they could have escaped torture, decided not to for the sake of their faith. Others who were put by the death of the sword. If you're like, why do we need those people? We don't need those people. They don't help us. Hold on, because we'll see why. But let's take a look first at their story before we get to the why. And let's first look at specifically one of the others that the author mentioned. You may have noticed that the others he talks about, there's no detail for them. No names, no time period, all those things. And it's caused many people to wonder who they're talking about. But most scholars agree that the others that he's talking about here in verse 35 are none other than what's called the Maccabee martyrs. A little history lesson for you. And in particular, mother and her 7 sons. Now the reason why, quickly, is because it's in the same sentence, right? Women who received back their dead by resurrection, and then others, he says, were tortured, not accepting the release so they might obtain a better resurrection. So what the author's doing is doing a direct comparison with a mother who received back, or 2 mothers who received back their sons, and then a mother and her 7 sons who did not have the same good ending, quote unquote. Now, the story is found in the book 2 Maccabees, chapter 7. Now, the book of Maccabees is a book that most of you probably aren't familiar with because it describes the 400 years of history between the Old Testament and the New Testament. They call it the intertestamental period. So after Malachi and then before the Gospels, there's 400 years of Israel history that isn't covered in the Bible. And we, modern readers, read the Bible, and so we don't read the book of Maccabees. But the people in those days, particularly the Hebrew author's audience that he's writing to, they would have known because it's very recent history to them. So then he talks about these people, and he doesn't give very much detail because everybody would have known exactly who was talking about. Now, during this 400-year period, there was a Roman emperor by the name of Antiochus IV Epiphanes. He was the ruler on the throne. And he, like some others, was a brutal, brutal tyrant. And he, for whatever reason, loved torturing Jews. That was his thing. It was like a game. And so he created this setup, this tradition almost, where he would call out prominent families in the Jewish faith to the public square, and then he would try to get them to do things they know they couldn't, break the law, eat unclean meats, or confess that God isn't God, and all those kind of things. And when they didn't, as many wouldn't, then he would torture them. He would beat them. He would eventually kill them. Now, the story that the author is pointing to is a story just like this, that happens in chapter 7 of Maccabees, and it's the story of the woman and her 7 sons. And here it goes like this. Now, before we get into it, a warning. This story is gory. So if you don't like that kind of stuff, you may want to, and the little ones are too little to know, but if you have a little one that can kind of understand, you may want to earmuffs on this one. But this is how the story goes. One day, Antiochus decides to call a family, mom and her 7 sons, faithful believers, Jews. And then he goes, "You're going to eat unclean meat." And they go, "No, we're not." So then what he does, he calls one son by one son, and the first son he calls him and he goes, "You're going to eat this unclean meat." And then they go, "No, we're not." "Oh, yeah?" And then they beat him. Bad. And they go, "You're going to eat this unclean meat." And he goes, "No, we're not." So then after that, you know what he does? He would then cut off their tongue, he would scalp them, and then chop off their hands and their feet. And while they're maimed, just kind of lying on the ground, he would heat up a massive pot and essentially cast iron skillet them to death. And then he would call the next son and say, "Let's go." One by one. This is what happened to them. Now, interestingly, as this was happening, this mother was looking on. And do you know what the mother did? She encouraged her sons to die courageously, never giving in, but she did it by saying this. This is in the book. "I do not know how your life began in my womb. I was not the one who gave you life and breath and put together each part of your body. It was God who did it. God who created the universe, the human race, and all that exists. He is merciful, and he will give you back life and breath again because you love his laws more than you love yourselves." She said this to all of her sons as that was happening. And all of her sons, all 7 of them, died courageously, being encouraged every step of the way by their mother to do exactly that. And one of them, the third one apparently, when it was his turn, after being beaten, he then stuck out his tongue and then stuck out his hands and said this, "God gave these to me, but his law means more to me than my hands, and I know God will give them back to me again." And all they had to do was to eat unclean meat. And the question is, why are they like this? Why did they do this, right? And what the author is telling us is because they wanted to obtain a better resurrection. Why did they do what they did? How did they do what they did? It's because they wanted to obtain a better resurrection. And if you're like, wait, well, what is a better resurrection? Wait, is there even a thing called an inferior resurrection? Like, what in the world are we talking about? Well, here's what he's talking about. And this is really key. And this is what we want to get at today and what I want you to walk away with today. It is a better resurrection because first, the mother whose sons died, well, they believed that indeed they'd be resurrected. But you remember those mothers that got their sons back? That wasn't actually a resurrection at all. It's what we call a resuscitation. It's like Lazarus. You know why? Because though they came back to life, you know what happens to them later? They died. Just because you come back to life does not mean you can't die, you can't suffer, you can't get a disease, and you can't be tortured again. But this mother and her 7 sons, the others that the authors mention, they did what they did because they believed they would obtain a better resurrection. They did what they did because they wanted to get a resurrection where they cannot die, a resurrection that only Jesus has promised for those who believe that though they die, that they will live and therefore never die. The mother and her sons, they put all their faith and all their trust in the truth that indeed there was a resurrection, in the truth that God would defeat death, make it completely null and void, and then give them back the life and breath that they were giving up in that moment. Well, the mother is saying this. She was saying this to her sons. She's saying, "Dear sons, I love you. But it does not matter what happens to us now. It does not matter what they do to us now. It's not going to matter what they're going to do, what anyone else is going to do. Why? Because the God who gives life is going to give it back to us one day. So don't blink. Do not fear. Have faith." Now, I think there are a lot of people in the world who would be like, "That's nuts. She's nuts. How in the world?" Many in the church will be like, "Okay, cool, Pastor Pete, but she different." The young people will say, probably jokingly, "She, him," which doesn't make sense. The question is, how are we supposed to be like that? How do we ever get there? How does this make any sense for us? Is God actually expecting us to be this way? No, we can't. She's different, we're not her, and so let's not conflate the two. So how? I think the author is giving us actually a couple of things that we need to consider. Things that we need to understand about the better resurrection, and then indeed know how this can be a reality for us. The first thing we must do is we have to relinquish and admit something that is going to be very excruciatingly difficult to do, and that is that safety is not the goal of my life. If we're being honest, we here in America, we live in one of the safest times and safest countries in the world in the history of humanity. Yes, there's still violence and tragedy all around us, always will be. But in comparison to the rest of the world and the rest of time, we live in, I think, the safest time and place throughout all of history. Because the truth of the matter is, if you look at history, most of the people who lived in history lived a few missteps away from this kind of stuff that the mother and the 7 sons would happen to them. Most people in life never dreamed throughout history that they would live to be old and then die of old age unless you were really rich and like royalty. And actually, in fact, even today, all around the world around us, there are many people who live this way, where life is not safe, where they indeed cannot guarantee that they're going to get nice and old and have all the futures and dreams that we all think we're going to have. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying you should not pray for safety. I'm not saying that this is not a good thing to want or desire. I'm not saying that. But I think we have to be honest with ourselves. Is safety the goal of my life? If we examine, I think the answer to that might be a yes. If you're not sure, then ask yourself this. If the choice is faithfulness to Christ and safety, which would I choose? Parents, you may not like me for this one, but I'll say it. If the choice for your children is faithfulness to Christ versus safety, what are you praying that they will choose? Because Scripture makes clear, faithfulness is indeed the goal. Following Jesus faithfully, come what may, is the goal. Hearing, well done, good and faithful servant, is the goal. And if you consider the fact that Jesus promises that those who follow him will be persecuted just like he was, and that we should then remain faithful and steadfast through all the hardships, that is the goal. And if that is the goal, then what we should be praying as much, if not more, than safety, which again isn't a bad thing to pray for, is that no matter what happens, no matter the hardships, no matter the outcome, no matter whether God's going to intervene and keep us safe or not, the first thing that we want and the most thing that we want is faithfulness, period. When Mason was born, I was a youth pastor. Before he was born, all the youth kids that I was pastoring then asked me, "Hey, what is your dreams for your kid?" And I said, "I don't have one." They're like, "You're lying. Every parent has dreams." And I go, "No, I don't have one. I have one wish, though." is that he would know Christ and have eternal life. And they go, no, you still have dreams or whatever. He's like, no, I don't care what he becomes. They're like, whatever. And then so one of the kids, he thought he was smart. He was like, what if your son wants to be, we knew he was going to be a son, what if your son wants to be like a missionary? And we had just watched Jim Elliot in that movie, and if you don't know the story, he goes into like the Amazon cannibals and then he dies. What if he wants to be a missionary to an cannibal place? And then you know what I told him? I said, my son, though he's mine, he's not mine. He's God's. Who am I to tell God what to do with him? The only thing that matters is that he would follow him, and that's all I want. Is safety the goal? Because if it is, it's going to be hard to be faithful at times. The second thing I think must happen if we're indeed going to be like these folks and have a better resurrection is that we must love God, not what God can give to us. We mentioned earlier that if our understanding, or better, our hope for faith is the triumphant, the victorious, the miraculous outcome type of faith, that we're doomed, that we're cooked, here's why. And this actually happens in the real world, and I've seen it multiple times, and many people like me, pastors and others, have seen it. Let's say someone gets stricken with a catastrophic disease, cancer or something like it. It's terminal. Too many times, literally, people have told these folks and their families a few things. First, they go, you got to pray. Good. I tell them that too. And pray hard and pray lots. Good. I tell them that too. And they go, why? Because if you pray, God will save and God will heal. AKA, if you don't pray, he will not. And more, if your loved one isn't getting any better, it means you didn't pray enough. Now, when I say it from the pulpit, I just sound like a jerk. And you're probably like, who would ever say that? People do. And I understand why. It's not because they're mean or they're jerks. It's because they want really bad, like we all do, for this to not end the way we know it's going to end most of the time. For triumph and victory and all those things. Because deep down, that's what we want. We wish and we hope that God will answer, that God will heal, that God will indeed do this thing. But here's the thing, we can't guarantee that. And to worse, guarantee it based on our effort, our diligence, our fervency in prayers is madness. If you're here for Good Friday, this is what I call the good works that become dead works, our attempt to control God to give us what we want. This type of faith, deep down, if we think the triumphant faith is indeed what it is, if we think great faith is this, then we certainly couldn't be more wrong about faith. Because as I said, there are plenty of cases where God does not heal, where God calls the person home. And do you know what happens to someone who's been told that if they pray, that God's going to heal, and if they didn't pray enough, that God's not going to do so? You know what happens when indeed the miraculous outcome does not happen? Anger, outrage, frustration, disappointment, turning away. And it makes sense, because if this is your belief, how could you not? If this is what you think great faith is, it proves to you that you didn't have great faith, that God doesn't love you. And all you have to say, indeed, because it's the only thing that's on your heart is, God, how could you? I thought I trusted you. I thought I loved you. I believed in you. I did all these things for you, and this is how you repay me. This is how you treat me? How dare you? But here's what the author is telling us. That's obscene to think that way. Why? Because then from the beginning, the issue isn't God or our faith. The issue is our faulty misunderstanding that this is what faith is, and this is what faith in God will get you. Tim Keller calls this trusting in an agenda for God, or loving God for the agenda that we have for him. It's what I'm calling loving God for what he gives to you. But we have to know this simply can't be, church. Do you know why? Because not only will God not conform, he can't conform to our desires. Because if he did, he wouldn't be God. Think about it. If I could control God to do what I want him to do, based on how hard I prayed, based on how diligently I worked, based on the number of good things that I did, then how could he be God? He's not. Do you know what he becomes? I don't have a picture. He becomes the genie from Aladdin. You know what the genie says to Aladdin, right? My wish is your command. God cannot be commanded. He's God. It shows us that we're loving God and trusting God for our agenda. But again, don't mishear me. I'm not saying God will not or won't or cannot heal. Indeed, he can. And sometimes he certainly does. We've gone over those stories. And I'm not also saying that if you have a faith that indeed results in miraculous things, that your faith was somehow lesser. No, that's not what I'm saying at all. Actually, if you remember the story of Abednego, right? So it's called Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, that were threatened. They overcame, but do you know what they said to the king before they were thrown in? This is what they said. "O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to give you an answer concerning this matter. If it be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us, and he will deliver us. But even if he does not, let it be known to you, O king, that we are not going to serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up." Even if he doesn't. It does not matter. Why? Because I don't love God for the things he can give to me. I love and trust God, period. This entire series we've been saying Jesus is better than the rest. Notice that we didn't say Jesus is better at giving you what you want than the rest. Well, then you might be like, well, Pastor Pete, okay, cool. Oh, we went too far. But why? If I can't guarantee, if I can't even have a little bit of guarantee that I'm going to get what I want, I'm going to get what I work for, if I'm going to get indeed the good ending and the happy ending, why believe? What's the point? Well, the reason why we should still believe, if this is how you think, is because what we get is what the author's been trying to tell us the entire time, the better resurrection. Verse 39-40. "And all these, having gained approval through their faith, did not receive what was promised, because God had provided something better for us, so that apart from us, they would not be made perfect." All of those examples, both the ones who triumphed and did not triumph, the author says were approved through their faith. Because why? They didn't actually end up getting the ultimate promise. They didn't get the ultimate thing. Why? Because God had provided something better for us, aka the people who lived after Jesus and us. That's the audience he's talking to. And he's saying, you and we have something better. And what is that better? It's Jesus and his resurrection. All the people in the past, all the way up to and beyond, right? He's saying we're going to be completed together in the city of God through the death and resurrection of Christ. Early on in chapter 11, he says this: "All these died in faith without receiving the promises, but having seen them and having welcomed them from a distance, having confessed that they were strangers and exiles on the earth. For those who say such things make it clear that they're seeking a country of their own. And indeed, if they had been thinking of that country from which they went out, they would have had opportunity to return. But as it is, they desire a better country, that is a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them." What he's saying is what they wanted was indeed something that's going to happen in the future that they knew was to be better than what they had now. A life that cannot end, where death is not the end, where even though we die, we still live. What they had was a faith that that was going to happen. But you know what the author is saying? You and I, he's saying we have more, we have better, we have proof, we have what it is. Why? Because Jesus has risen. You just sang it. You're going to sing it all day, I hope. You're going to sing it for the rest of your life, for all eternity. He has risen. The grave is empty. He is resurrected. He is alive. Now, if you go back to the beginning of chapter 11 in verse 1 through 2, the author tells us what the definition of faith is. Faith, the thing that we need to be able to get through all of this. And he defines it like this. He says, "Now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not yet seen." It's not on the screen. And then pastor and theologian R.K. Hughes puts it like this, and I think it's brilliant. He says, faith is this. He says, faith is being certain of two things, having two certitudes. The first is a future certitude that makes one sure that the future is as if the present, aka a future certainty that makes one sure that what's in the future and that is promised is just as real as everything I have right now. That's the first thing that we must be certain of. Then the second thing we must be certain of is a visual certitude, aka that which is invisible is brought into view. Faith is being certain that what is invisible is just as real as what we can see right now with our physical eyes. And what the author is saying is those in the list, both the triumphant and the not, had this faith regardless of their triumph or victory. They never got the ultimate triumph or victory over the ultimate enemy, over the ultimate end boss, death itself, but they were certain that the future resurrected and therefore eternal life was just as real as the life they were living right now. That the tongues and the hands and the feet that they might have lost, like the 7 sons did, was just going to be as real in the future, if not better than it is now. They were certain that that was going to be all real. And the author's saying, but we have that right now. AKA, we have no excuse not to live this way. We have much better than their faith, much better evidence than their faith. Why? Because we have Jesus who's resurrected, indeed is alive. Now, at this point, someone might say, whoa, Pastor Pete, hold up, back up a sec. We know how you do things, and you're not being honest. How do we know we have this resurrected Jesus? I ain't seen him. I didn't see him resurrect. That's a future thing that I don't see. That's an invisible thing. I don't have better than them. I have the exact same thing. Well, fortunately for you, I hope, in 2025, here's the actual current state of affairs. Throughout the last few decades, many scholars, people, publications, non-Christian, all of them, have come out and said this: that though many have confronted and said the resurrection isn't real, that if you consider everything, they go, he has to have resurrected. Here's why. The one thing that is historically proven, fact that everyone agrees with, historians, is that Jesus was a physical person that died and was buried in a tomb. And then they also historically, no doubt about it, fact, say the grave was empty. So the thing that they all touted was what happened to the body, right? Was it stolen, yada, yada, yada? Too many theories to go through now with time. And so many people say, no, he didn't resurrect, something happened to the body, so on and so forth, so it's not real. But then this many years later, historians keep looking at it and they go, wait, but there's two things that happened that indeed would not have happened, could not have happened if Jesus indeed didn't resurrect. And these are the two things. One, a group of people, 50 plus, would not have said that they all saw a resurrected Jesus. And secondly, the church would have never became the church. Here's why. A whole bunch of people said that they saw a resurrected Jesus. And you know what? Many people said that's not real, why they hallucinated. But all the scientists and everyone has agreed, you can't have group hallucinations. It's not a thing. They all said they saw Jesus in a different time, different places, not all at the same time. It's not a group like they weren't on drugs or whatever. This is not a thing. So they all indeed saw someone, or they were all mentally crazy and they were proven not to be. So that's the first thing. But then the second thing is, how does the church become the church? Actually, even look at the disciples. Look at Peter. Peter and the disciples are classic people who wanted to believe in an agenda. So when Christ went to the cross, because they wanted Jesus to be a leader of Rome and they wanted to be in the cabinet and kind of be in the leadership. And when Jesus was being crucified, their whole lives crumbled. They fell. They ran away. They deserted God. But right after Jesus resurrected and after they touted the fact that they saw him resurrected, you know what happens? They become apostles. Peter, the same guy who denied Jesus 3 times in front of a crackling fire, do you know what he becomes? He becomes a pillar of the church. He dies as a martyr. He says, I can't die straight up. I got to die upside down because that's too good for me. And he goes, you know what? Nothing can explain that kind of movement, a church that becomes what it is, if not for the resurrection of Christ. Look at history. Any movement that rises and falls with their leader. A church like ours that went from nothing to this does not happen after the leader dies. It only happens that way. Why? Because the leader's alive. The only way these things can be true, they're saying, is indeed Jesus has resurrected. And the whole point of them is saying this. Then the burden of proof of us believing whether Jesus is indeed resurrected is not on anyone else but us, because we have the proof. Actually, very ironically and interestingly, if we then do not believe the resurrection is real, even though we have this that many people have said is indeed true, then what we're doing is no longer history, they say. They're saying we're taking a leap of faith to believe something that is historically like almost a no-brainer. Just to say that Jesus isn't real. In many ways, to say that then we don't have to follow him and be like him. Because that's too much pressure on our lives. So the question that the author is facing and asking us is, do you believe in the resurrection? Because if you do, it has to change your life, he's saying. Those martyrs are not weirdos. They believed in something and they lived for it. Do you believe it? Now, as we finish, if you don't yet, let me share with you one more story as we finish. It's the story of 김나의 사모님, who's Charles's mother, as you saw in the picture earlier. As Sarah and Jason told you, 사모님, as I'll refer to her here, passed this past Monday morning, the morning after Palm Sunday. Now, I had been preparing for her passing because Charles had prepared me for the passing, that it was imminent. And he knew because while she's been battling cancer for many, many years, largely going without treatment, they were told that they had 1 month. Now, when Charles came to me and said, hey, this is the situation, Pastor Pete, here's what I think we're going to do, so on and so forth, I was blown away. And then when he told me that the reason why she hasn't gotten treatment is because she wanted to save what little of their finances they had for the education of their 2 twin sons, Charles and Brent, I understood immediately what was going on here. As you know, Korean pastors don't make a lot. If you run an online church, you make even less than not a lot. Charles is a first-year medical student at Baylor. Brent is about to be a grad student in the fall. And then I found out that after they were told that they had a month left, Charles, being here, his mom being in Georgia, obviously wanted to go home and see her. So he called her every day, and he said, Mom, I want to come home. And she goes, no, you can't. He goes, why not? You can't come see me. Why not? And her reason was very, very simple, but again, it may come as a shock to you, you may not like it, but hear me out. Her reason was, earlier in her life, at a similar age where Charles is now, she had seen someone in her condition then. And she remembers how greatly it impacted her, how much it hurt, and how it really changed how she looked at a lot of different things. And she says, if you, my son Charles, who's going to be a doctor, see me like this, it may negatively impact the calling on your life, and I will not allow it. Because the calling on your life is bigger than my life and your life. That which God has called you to is bigger than that. So out of the love for her son, she said, you can't come home. And then out of his love for his mom and his trust in God, he also didn't go. So through a whole bunch of different arrangements, we had a funeral, memorial service. There were many people. It was beautiful. Here in the midst of Holy Week, it brought to me just the reality of everything that we're celebrating here today. So this past Wednesday, we had a memorial service, and everything went. After the memorial service, I was on my way home, and Christina, my wife, she looks at me and she goes, how did she do it? I went, do what? How did she not have her son come visit her, knowing she wouldn't ever see him again alive? How did she do it? Excuse me for the Korean, but the question is, 너무 보고 싶어 했을 텐데. She must have wanted to see him so bad, but how did she do it? That's the question, isn't it? And although I cannot say for certain, because I did not speak to her, her actions and her family and all that I saw, the fruit of indeed her life, shows me it can really only be one thing, and that is this. She was certain, just as certain as the mother and the 7 sons, that she was going to get her son back. It's the only way you make that decision. Otherwise, it is foolish and insane. But if you believe, like she did, that she was going to get her son back, you make that decision 10 times out of 10. Because the future reality is better. A better resurrection, yes. Do you know why? Because the thing here is, we must all admit, I have no idea how my life or your life is going to go. I have no idea how it's going to end. My dad is like 60. The thing he keeps talking about, my grandmother's like 96 and she's about to pass away soon. The thing he keeps on saying is, I just hope that I don't die with like mental illness, because that's really difficult on everybody. The point is, we don't know how this is going to end. But here's the crazy part. I do know exactly how the future is going to be in the future resurrected life. No pain, no tears, no sorrow, no disease, none of it. It's better than this. I can guarantee that for you. Why? Because Jesus is risen. The invisible life that I cannot see now is more certain and better than the one I can see with my very eyes. I don't know what's going to be like with my sons. I have no idea. Neither do you. And if you think you do, let's just be honest, we don't. But the one thing that I know is that Jesus was buried in a grave, and then he rose up, and he's alive. And he said he's going to come back. He's going to bring us all together again. A better resurrection for all. And that is certain. And if you have that certain faith, then you will live differently. You have everything you need to be able to live the life that Christ calls you to. Fear? What fear? I used to not like the songs that we sing. Ironically, I don't tell the praise team what to sing. We're not singing one today that used to have the lines, or that has the lines, death, where is your sting? Because death stings, doesn't it? But in a better resurrection, death does not sting. And as the church of Christ, the resurrected one, the call that the author is giving is, do you indeed? Do you know? Do you believe? Here's the crazy thing. Charles calls me up. We had honey meat for ice cream. I had no idea what he was calling me up for. And he calls me and says, hey, Pastor Pete, my mother is going to pass away soon. And we're going to have the funeral here, if that's okay with you. The entire time, he was certain. I've had the privilege of knowing him a few years, and over this past week, his faith, his mom's faith, has been reverberating in me. And then do you know what he texted me Monday morning? He goes, Pastor Pete, my mother passed away this morning, but she passed away with a smile on her face because she's home where she's supposed to be. When we buried her body on Friday, he goes, man, what a blessing that she was buried the same day we're celebrating Jesus' burial. If you know him, you know that faith is certain. Do you know the better resurrection, church? Do you have the better promise? I pray and I hope that you do. Why? Because he has risen. A better faith, yes. A faith that's not reliant upon what's going to happen, that's not dependent upon the outcome, only dependent on who Jesus is, the one who says this to you, I am the resurrection and the life. Not that I give it to you, I will, but I am the resurrection and the life. And those who believe in me and are certain of my resurrection, though they die, they will live, and if they live, they will never die. And your life that isn't ending is going to be way better than anything that we do on this earth. So follow, though it may be hard. Have faith, though it may be difficult. But when you do, live like nothing can touch you, because indeed it can't. Death, where's your sting? It's been defeated because he has died and he has risen again. Amen? So church, on this Resurrection Sunday, may the Holy Spirit bless you with the truth of the resurrection. May you be certain that the future that is to come is way more certain and way better than the one that we live now. May you live with eyes for the future, the resurrected kingdom, your heavenly home, when God brings it and makes all things new. And in so doing, may you then be the church to the glory of his name. May you walk out these doors singing, "Oh, death, where is your sting? For indeed he is risen, and I too shall rise, because he told me so." Praise be his name. Take some time to reflect, and then we'll sing together.